Hmongish is a podcast produced by Hmong American Media, located in Sacramento, California, and sponsored by Hmong Organizing for Progress and Empowerment Center, also known as the Hope Center, and Culture Through Cloth. I am your host, Sean.
And I'm your host, Pachia. And we are
Hmongish. Hmongish is a podcast where Pachia and I share our thoughts on anything and all things Hmong, diving into our own experiences of what it means to be Hmong and American in today's society.
So today we are discussing something that I think is super fascinating and interesting, and that is Hmong woman magic and cultural stereotypes.
Hmong woman magic.
So the cultural stereotypes that Hmong Miao women have in the East, which heavily involve this concept of magic or black magic. So I don't think this is a topic that gets really talked about very much, so I think it would be really interesting to our listeners. But with this, we're going to be going over cultural stereotypes of Hmong Miao women around black magic within Chinese cinema. And then also we're going to be taking a look at female figures or celebrities in China who also have Hmong Miao origins and how they have ultimately ended up under these, falling under these types of stereotypes.
My undergraduate studies was in Chinese history, and when I took Chinese history, especially in Ming China and Qing China, you hear about the Chinese women in that era were footbound. They're supposed to be filial to the household, their husband. Their foot's bound, so they can't do any work and they can't get out of the house. However, Hmong women experienced the freedom that none of these women experienced. Their foot wasn't bound. They could go out of the household. They were poor, they were peasants, but they were free.
But they had this sense of freedom in a sense that was different to women who were footbound.
Yes, so scholars and people around this time, they feared the Hmong woman. And so they come up with the notion of gu magic. Mm-hmm. Gu magic is a myth that these women from southern China knows how to use poison, and they use poison, snakes, centipedes. They blend it into certain things, and they, either they're hypersexualized, right? Mm-hmm. The Hmong woman who uses poison, hypersexualized, tricks men into sleeping with them or kills them.
So it kind of becomes associated with like black magic that's done for like sexuality or not sexuality, but like sexual purposes to kind of seduce men. And I don't know, you obviously know a little bit more about it than I do. I kind of did some readings on it.
Yeah, so
it's a new concept to me.
They call it gu magic, and it's like witchcraft, and I think it's still a big thing in China today.
It's like a type of sorcery and witchcraft. So it says here, gu magic is a famous witchcraft remedy allegedly said to be a dangerous product of the Miao in China, and was actually which was a saying that was actually traceable to the Han. So this connection suggested that such lore was promoted by a need to enforce ethnic boundaries in light of the scandalous sexual and gender mores of the Miao, and the fear that intermarriage or sexual relations with their woman would mean irrevocable contamination. So this analysis addressed the problem of danger surrounding minority sexuality and marriage practices through an examination of Han allegations of the Miao's use of magic poison. And this power attributed to Miao woman to cause illness and even death through gu poison sorcery was a projection of the fear held by the Han Chinese of the perceived strength and relative freedom in Miao woman's gender roles. So this part I thought was very interesting. This strength and relative freedom profoundly threatened the Confucian moral order, which already saw Han women as dangerous because of their liminal status as those who moved through marriage between competitive or hostile lineages. The threat implied by outside women marrying in was compounded by the fact that during the Ming and Qing dynasties, large number of male migrants and demobilized soldiers who had been sent to suppress Mao rebellions had settled in these southwest provinces, and in the absence of Han women, depended on the Miao and other non-Han for marriage partners, making the maintenance of a safe distance impossible. So this is actually a quote from the cultural anthropologist and scholar Louisa Shine, who's done quite a lot of studies on not just Miao, but like ethnic minority women and their role in China.
Gender roles in China, yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah, and you could see where, women played a role in Chinese society. Women played a role in marriages, and they would go to a different lineage or a different clan, and then they would rear children for that clan. So if you're prominent in this family, you're taking that wealth, that knowledge to another clan. And so they were seen as a threat as well. And for the Hmong woman, it was even a bigger threat to Confucian values, because we were free, I guess.
I was going to ask if you know, but like, was foot binding generally done for all Han women or Han women of status?
Mostly Han women of status,
but that would even mean like middle class people.
People in cities. Like if you were in the city.
Because generally peasants, you have to work to get by. So you're not going to bind a woman's feet and not have them be able to work.
Yes, and that's.
So in that sense, because we were peasants, then we had more sense of freedom. That's my interpretation.
Or there was high class male families too,
but they didn't bind their feet.
They didn't bind their feet.
Good point.
The culture didn't bind their feet, and they were free. So, I think there was this quote in this one photo I saw that says, "Male woman takes no back seat to their men." In the 40s, and I was like, "Wow, okay, yeah, I guess Hmong women," and I don't know how that how gender roles between as Hmong culture modernized.
I mean, that's a great perspective in looking historically at the role of the woman, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't really have conversations about how women in the past have been empowered. And I think that's a great way of looking at it, because I hear women say all the time, like, their moms are the matriarchs of the family. Like, their moms have very big personalities and do a lot for the family, and that's wonderful, and that's something that should be recognized.
Definitely. And in the Hmong culture, right, when there's such a big taboo, who would you call to come curse the taboo away? It's a Hmong woman. You call your aunt, who got the more power,
right?
And got the more power, right? So I was like, that's power right there. Like, if something taboo was to happen within a family, you wouldn't call a man to come make up the rule.
And I think it's a great way to shift the narrative of how we understand the role of the woman, or traditionally even, or today. Not to say that violence against women doesn't happen, but it's a great way to reshape how we understand like the power of women in many ways. Like, because we held this type of power and freedom, then that's been sort of twisted into some type of a negative cultural stereotype.
Yeah, like we become the exoticness for the Han Chinese. Like, it's exotic. The Hmong woman, the male woman, they're free. They're non-foot bound. They could travel freely.
They're dangerous.
They're witches. They're
witchcraft. They're the femme fatale. They are like using witchcraft to seduce like men and like bringing their downfall.
Yeah, so targeting travelers, and all that stuff. And
I mean, witches in itself. Many of us come from have been raised in Western culture. Many, I think, of our listeners are not Hmong too. Witchcraft itself, I mean, if you look into that history, witches were the healers who were using like plants and herbs to help people. And, they had a sense of power as well, which men typically didn't necessarily like. And so there was the whole witch hunt craze. Witches were targeted. Pagan rituals or pagan communities were targeted and killed off. And so it's not really far off or different from what happened in the 16th and 17th century.
Yeah, and this phenomenon wasn't even just strictly in China. Like in Vietnam too, there's stereotypes about Hmong people and black magic, and especially Hmong women hypersexualized and that, and so it was fairly recent, like in the 1800s, 1900s. They still talk about this, and Hmong people and black women, and modern day too. I think
it's called Bun Nhai, right?
Bun Nhai, I think.
So instead of gu magic in Vietnam, it's called Bun Nhai. If I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
It's how it's spelled.
Yeah. Yeah. It's Bun Nhai. And then, I think that's like black magic that they think that the ethnic kin, that's the majority of Vietnamese. They believe that the ethnic folks in the mountains, especially the Hmong
including
people,
the Hmong,
use black magic to, poison or kill travelers or seduce men who go to the villages, and
so they're a danger.
Yeah, and that negative stereotype is still happening today. Like I shared a personal text with Pachia, with one of my friends, and she is Indo-Chinese, right? And then I was joking because we studied abroad together in China in 2010, and we got pretty close. And I always joked to her, and I was like, I'm at first I told her I was Miao, and she didn't understand. She's like, what's that? And I was like, she's like, Mongolian. So she kept sending me all these Mongolian pop songs. She kept sending me all these Mongolian pop songs.
Oh, because she liked Mongolian pop songs?
And I was like, no, I'm Hmong. And then I showed her, I was like, okay, you're Vietnamese, right? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, we're Miao from like Sapa and Lao Chai.
You say Miao because they call it Hmong Miao.
And then I was like, Miao Tzu in Chinese and that. And then she's like, oh, okay. She asked around, and then I kind of joked her. I was like, we know black magic. And then
it all came out.
It kind of struck a chord. She's like, oh, yeah, they do talk about like Hmong people with black magic. And, I think recently I just connected with her, right? And this one of the texts, she's like, I don't want to be a Vietnamese guy, so I picked to be a Chinese guy. And I was like, I feel sorry for our Southeast Asian guys. Like, we don't get our chance with Asian women. And she's like, well, I thought Hmong people did black magic, so I didn't like Hmong people too. I was like, what? That stereotype is still there? Like, that black magic? Maybe they see us doing shamanism.
Yeah, but
they think it's black
no,
magic.
of course. I think, of course, it comes from shamanism and, living in the wilderness and not within cities or civilization or something like that.
So I think, like, in modern society, maybe some Asian stereotypes still say, this is an Eastern perspective. This is not a Western perspective. It's an Eastern perspective that, the Hmong are, an old, archaic people who knows how to use poison, black magic, and they should not be trusted.
I mean, it's a type of stereotype that develops to keep us away from one another.
Yeah.
To keep the line from being like tainted or contaminated is exactly what it said in that quote I read.
Yeah, don't marry the Hmong person because you'll be tainted or you'll be these other
it goes both ways too, right? Because then like in the Hmong community, people don't want you to marry outside either.
Oh yeah,
mainly because if you marry outside of the community, they're not going to love you, they're going to look down on you, they're not going to treat you well. As a woman, I've heard that a lot. Like, how do you know that so and so is going to love you? What if they treat you badly? Then we can't really help you or like talk to their families about it.
Going back to portrayal of Hmong women, male women in cinema.
So right? I feel like so this has an impact on how Hmong Miao women have been portrayed in cinema.
Chinese cinema today.
So not very long ago.
Chinese pop
even,
culture.
I mean, even still today
Chinese
with one of the
cinema,
examples.
Today it is still, Miao women are still exotic. They're to be seeked after now.
That's because you mentioned before, like, because we come from this old archaic culture, then to many outsiders in China, like Hmong women kind of fulfilled this like fantasy of like, returning to this like long gone time of like magic and beauty and nature ancient times. Like you've kind of mentioned that before, right?
Yeah, and so the first film that we were going to talk about, Swordsman 2. I know you guys watched Swordsman 2, but it's like this great wuxia film by this. I forgot who the director was. It featured Jet Li and Bridget Lin. And just a quick summary of the film. It's actually one of my favorite films growing up. Like, I watched it and I was like, oh, this film is really cool. And I was like, oh, these must be Hmong people. And you're really happy. But then in hindsight, 10, 20 years later, after like going to college and studying Chinese history, and then you go back and you rewatch the film from a different perspective and you're like, it's pretty stereotypical and paints Hmong people in such a savage way.
let's talk about the film, because I had never seen The Swordsman 2. So it's actually a film, part of like this trilogy movie series. Yes. So there was the first, the second, the third. This is the second. And it's about the main character at the time, who is Jet Li character, and
he's Han Chinese. He portrays a Han Chinese swordsman, and he and his fellow swordsman comes from like a sacred mountain that
does a special type of martial arts.
Yeah. And then there's 3 groups, right? There's the Japanese invasion, and there's the Han Chinese government, which is I think the Ming government, I do believe, and then
there's this like Sun Moon cult.
Sun Moon cult, which is called
they call them the Highlanders,
right?
Of the Sun Moon cult, which is referencing kind of like what minorities in the Highlands.
Yeah, I mean, they were blowing the thing, they were dancing,
they
were drinking.
But then he essentially like reconnects with his group of friends, which consisted in the online description, they said they're like tribal warrior women.
Yes.
And then he has to like help them like find their dad. Who's being imprisoned by the brother, the Moon cult, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, the dad is the leader of the Highlanders, right? The structure of the Highlanders in that movie was that the father was of one of the main girl who is apparently a ethnic minority and most likely Hmong or Miao, and then the father was locked up by the brother, which is called Invincible Dawn, played by Bridget Lin. So in the film, Bridget Lin is a man, but she's
this like super iconic figure now in like wuxia fantasy novels and stuff.
So she is called Invincible Dawn, and long story short, she was a man. She wanted to overthrow the Chinese government, so she worked with the Japanese.
Okay.
And she gave up being a man to study sacred documents or sacred.
He castrated himself to be able to like learn from the scroll, and then he like became a woman. So it's like very fascinating. I recently just watched it. I think I've seen it as a young girl, but I never really paid attention because I wasn't into martial arts films. So I recently rewatched it, and I watched the Hmong dub version. So I kind of missed out on some of the details and didn't really understand. So I had to go back and read like the synopsis of what it was. But fascinating. And so the people who are portrayed as Hmong, which we can assume because of what they're wearing. And apparently this film actually got like best costume film of the year as well, which I thought was super interesting. When it
came out, people were like super in love with the film because it features something that was a part of China.
Like the costumes, but whatever. I didn't like it. I thought they were cheesy, but I always think that about stuff. But a lot of their costumes are straight up Hmong.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not even just like Greater Miao group, but it's like very like Yunnanese, like Hmong. Like Western Miao clothing.
And so, long story short, a lot of stereotypes in this movie of like goo magic, right? The Miao woman.
The 2 women were using goo magic,
for sure. Poison. It's all about poison.
They had like scorpions and snakes. And then at the end, one of the women, she was like dying, and she like ate the snake, and I was
to boost her power.
Yeah, it was like
and so I was like, wow, what is these stereotypes, right? And then there was like one Han woman, and she was with
she was with Jet Li and them,
Kiddo, and that's her name in there. And so she was, she didn't have like special powers. She didn't have poison.
Interesting.
But then like the Miao woman in there, they were like exotic. They drank. They drank.
They did drink.
Drank. They sang. They
They sat on rooftops.
Right? They flew. They sat on rooftops.
They were free. They were imprisoned. I don't know. There's
But this play of goo magic and the exotic Miao woman is still depicted today in modern cinema.
The film is very fascinating. Like after I watched it, I realized why people like it so much. So there is this depiction of Hmong woman in there that we are talking about, but also just like the main character, Bridget Lin's character, like fascinating, like transgender portrayal of like power and strength, but evil. Like, it was really weird. Something that I probably can't speak to very much, but people should watch it if you haven't seen it.
This is like a conspiracy theory of mine, is that, you know, for the Highlanders to be at peak power, right, and be able to overthrow the government, the leader had to become a woman, like a male woman.
That's
right?
Interesting.
And being male,
Bridget Lynn's character did a lot of sewing. Yeah.
Right? Bandao sewing. That she was sewing all the time, and
seemed like she was sewing her own like empress cloak.
Yes,
because she was sewing a dragon.
Yes.
But she used needles and threads to like attack people. That was her power.
Yes. And so I was like, wow, Hmong people, and now with like the national heritage of China is like our sewing, cross stitches and all that.
Right. So it's a characteristic of Highlanders to sew and make beautiful clothing and be the artisans of society. But I mean, this extends also into like more recent movies. So the Swordsman came out in 1992, 93, early 90s. Yeah. But more recently, there's also like a Chinese drama.
Right.
Chinese Paladin.
Chinese Paladin 5. It's actually a myth based on a video game. I think it has a lot of male culture in it, and they call it male culture, male village. And
so they do call it.
They do. Yeah. You should watch the drama. It's like 30 episodes.
I saw the segment that you like that little clip that
that was one of the beginning segment. But then
and they were fighting with
it's a story about fighting demons, like the human realm fighting off the demon realms, and then like the male people are descendants of Nuwa. That's the theory.
Really?
Yeah, and they
I'm low-key obsessed with Nuwa, just saying.
They're able to like summon water, rain, and all that.
And thunder, which, okay, let's not get into the stories yet.
But then the you see like in the movie, you see like the stereotypes of Gu magic and the male people, like it's
so
apparent.
Interesting. And Gu magic is just such an old concept. I was reading into it, like it's found on the oracle bones, like the first inscription of it and stuff. And so
I think at this point that we're an ancient people, but then I think it's also that negative stereotypes where it labels us so that we are to be feared, and that negative stereotype that we are not modernized, backwards, But then I think in this movie in particular,
people don't like old things. They want modern things.
In this fight scene, you have two male women fighting each other, and they were like, it was like they're using poison. There was like a poison iguana.
A poison iguana. And then the lady was literally wearing like a huge like headdress with like, it was like big, and then like these silver horns. She was like throwing snakes and like calling the snake, and like I was like, whoa.
I was like, wow, these Hmong women, don't mess with them, poison you, die.
But you know what? Like, as a Hmong American woman, all these things are so new to me. I don't know a Hmong person. Okay, I don't know a Hmong woman who raises snakes. I'm sorry. I don't know one. I was kind of interested in getting a pet snake at one point, but I don't have any.
Hey, maybe that's your Gu magic.
I'm like, Gu magic? I don't know anyone who raises snakes and puts scorpions in like jars and stuff like that.
I think moving forward, Chinese cinema, we might see like a lot of Gu magic being depicted. I think it's something that a lot of Hmong people in the West, we don't pick up. Like, it's subtle, like using poison and magic. We don't realize that, wait, how come the Han Chinese aren't using magic? Well, only
it's always like the ethnic minorities portrayed. Because like the way, so I was listening to the Hmong dubbed version of Swordsman, and the way they dub it, as a Hmong person, if you're listening, it's confusing because Jet Li will be, the version I was listening to, Jet Li will be like, oh, but then later on it would be like, oh, and well, I mean, so in the way they dub it, the characters become Hmong, and then it kind of erases like what the context is, kind of, and they don't call the Sun Moon cult Highlanders, obviously, so you don't get that context that like there's this separation between
Highlanders, mainlanders, and then the Japanese.
You don't really see that, or you don't get that context. And even with what they're wearing, you might not necessarily recognize that Hmong, right? Yeah. Because I was watching it with my partner, and he was like, "They're Hmong," and I'm like, "Yes, they're Hmong. Like, they're totally Hmong. Just look at what they're wearing."
I think because of Gu magic and all this, then there's always this like, oh, Hmong women are a special kind of breed of woman. In the 1900s, right? There's modern Hmong women who are seen as like the beauty of China.
Yeah, our looks are very defined as well
yes.
in like a cultural. It's not cultural memory, but it's just like cultural understanding. And I remember this because I made a friend when I was studying abroad in South Korea, and she was from China, and I was very young at the time. I was like 18, but I was like, oh yeah, I'm Hmong. I like Miaozu. And she was like, oh, no wonder why you're so beautiful, because the Miao women are all beautiful. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, everyone knows Miao women are the most beautiful women. And I'm like, oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, and right now you go to China or you tell people you're Miao and they're like, oh, ethnic tourism, Xinjiang, all the most beautiful women are there.
That's interesting.
And it's like...
we're commodified, guys. What the...
Yeah, but then I think, this is a quote from an anthropologist, Diamond, and he said, Chinese belief in the Gu and Miao witchcraft is not based on an ethnographic fact, but on irreconcilable culture of a different argument and the bizarre imagination of the Han people on the Miao people, and
so how they want to envision who we are as these magical
beings
from the past who are still around.
Yeah, and the woman... not the men. The women are the ones who stand out the most.
Well, it's easy to because, like I say, women are easily objectified.
Yes,
it's much easier to place that on us.
Yeah, and so we also want to talk about female figures who are prominent in in Chinese history. One of the prominent figures that we're talking about is Lani, right? Lani is you don't know Lani, then Lani
is that her full name? Lani.
Yeah, Lan is
Lan. And then last name is Lan and then Ni.
Yeah, that's the nickname. She has a full name, but I don't know what her full name was. Lan is her.
But she's known as the Miao Princess.
Miao Princess,
Lani.
Miao Beauty of the 1940s or the Republican era. So in China, there's different eras, right? There's the dynastic era, the modern era. This is the Republican era. What is the Republican era?
Like right after the Qing Dynasty.
Right after the Qing Dynasty. That's called the Republican era. So the 1917 through 1945, that is the Republican era. And during this time, there's this Miao Hmong femme fatale. Her name is Lani. She had blue eyes. And, a few folks know, but she actually came and lived in San Francisco. She returned to China in 1990, and then she passed away in Shanghai in 1996. So why is she a femme fatale? She was born in Yunnan to an aristocratic family, Miao family. Yunnan, then most Miao in Yunnan are Western Hmong. Yeah. And so... I did confirm with my a professor, Zhang Xiao, in China about Lani, and she's like, that's a good research topic you should look into because Lani is Hmong. And I was like, cool, this is so cool. Lani is Hmong, yeah. And she's interesting because she's very beautiful. So when her family moved to Shanghai, her father got an illness and the family became broke. They married her off to a rich Chinese family. She got a divorce. And then she met Sun Ke or Sun Fo, which is the eldest son of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. So you don't know Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Dr. Sun Yat-sen is considered the George Washington of China.
The founding father of
modern China. He was the one who overthrew the Republic. He was the one who led the KMT. And if he didn't pass away with cancer at such an early age, we don't know what modern China would be like today, And his son, first son, right? The eldest son, Du Nieyao, the second wife, yeah, Chinese has a second wife too, was Lani, I don't know if she coerced him or he just fell for her beauty. But
don't say that. That's like falling into the stereotype.
I don't know. Yeah, but then, they were married and, But
it was not uncommon for men to take multiple wives at this time. I mean, I was looking into it and I was just surprised at how many political leaders just had first wife, second wife, third wife, fourth wife. Right? I'm like, okay, all right. Yeah. So it was his second wife.
And
he seemed very smitten by her.
Yeah.
I read the story, and he had actually been having an affair with his first secretary, who he got pregnant but did not marry. And then he met Lonnie and was really interested, hired her on as a secretary, then liked her so much and
he
married her
against the wishes of his first wife
and his family because,
they're the first family of
China.
They're
the first family of China at the time.
And so when his father died, Su Yat-sen died, and they were like, oh, who's up for the next leadership, right? And so that was when Chiang Kai-shek took over the KMT, and you don't know Chiang Kai-shek, then he is the like generalismo of the KMT, who went to Taiwan and created the modern Republic of Taiwan today, and was exiled from China. But then Sun Fo or Sun Ke, during the election of Chiang Kai-shek, Sun Ko ran on a ticket to be the vice president. But because Sun Fo or Sun Ke, because of Lonnie, she was a crafty businesswoman too. And so she was really into high-end makeup. And so what she did was import and export. And this was during World War II, And so she imported products from Germany and she imported products from Japan.
Which was illegal.
Because China was going to war with Japan and China was going to war with Germany. They were on the side of the Allies. And Sun Fo, loving Lonnie so much, wrote letters, and you could say it's corruption, right? He went and told the
corruption for makeup. Holy moly.
He went and told the customs agent, say, hey, let these products pass. It's my wife's. And then they exposed that. And so.
Yeah, they were like, they had like the proof of the letters he had written and stuff like that. And so it was a huge scandal. And so then what happened? Like, was he able to run for vice president?
So he lost the election because of that huge scandal. They're like, oh, he has a second wife. He was coerced. And
this terrible woman who's like working with the other side.
Importing products from Germany and trying to sneak it in and sell it to the public here in Shanghai. And, it was political suicide on his part. And so he lost the election. So, and so that's why the Sun family, were ostracized or not part of politics. And so that was that was the nail in the coffin for him.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so Chiang Kai-shek took the helm of the KMT. He fought in the Chinese Civil War, lost, moved to Taiwan. Sun Fo moved to Taiwan. Lonnie couldn't move to Taiwan because she was the second wife. And so I think she came to the States. And so
she lived here for a while.
She lived here for a while in San Francisco. And then
that must have been the 40s or the
late 40s, 50s. And then in the late 80s,
she went back
she went to Shanghai, the CCP or the mainland China. It wasn't Taiwan, invited her to go back because they consider her the first part of the first family too. I think part of the Sun family, she's not considered part of their family at all. Like, she's ostracized. She is not part of the Sun family. And so her daughter, Nora's son, was ostracized from the family too. She is a prominent figure who, and they don't consider themselves male. They're Chinese, like they're just of male origin, but they're Chinese. Yeah, but she played a very prominent role in Chinese and U.S. bilateral trade relations in the 80s.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. And that's how a Hmong woman from Yunnan was a big influence in the founding of the modern Republic of China. Wow, a Hmong woman did all that, just being a femme fatale.
But because of that, she was known as this remarkable beauty.
Blue eyes,
very exotic. They even said, she had the Miao exotic look in her. Yes. But because of the scandal, now she's known as a femme fatale, adding only to this stereotype of Hmong women being these dangerous women who are out to, just destroy men. Do you think that this type of stereotype is still around?
I think it is. And no. Yes and no.
Yes and no?
Yeah, because I think because of the one-child policy in China, I visited China multiple times and I talked with a lot of friends there. And I think a lot of the Han Chinese men see Hmong women as they're not that modernized, they don't spend a lot of money, and we still have a chance to marry them because they're really beautiful. It's still, the stereotype is that they're really beautiful because I don't know if it's the Gu magic, but it's just that Miao women are traditional and they're really beautiful. They know how to take care of themselves. But then you realize Hmong people are pretty tight. Miao community is pretty tight knit. They don't marry Han men. A lot of Miao women married within other ethnic minorities or within the Miao family themselves, and so it's this saying called like, are you a cook Hmong or a cook Miao or a raw Miao? You know,
Hmong
Hmong Yong, right? Shu Miao or Sheng Miao. A lot of Hmong are still what they consider raw Miao, which is Sheng Miao, and they only married within the Hmong culture, or they only married. And so, like, these Chinese men try to go to Hmong villages to marry Hmong brides, but they can't.
What's a cooked Miao?
A cooked Miao would be a Shu Miao. That means you are, I guess, tied to the modern Chinese state. So you view yourself as a Chinese.
And then a raw Miao is someone who still lives in the village, abides by cultural traditions or something like that.
And I think you are bound to the Chinese state as well. And you do see yourself as Chinese, but you still have that heart of saying, like, I'm never going to marry a Han person. Like, I am going to, like, marry within my culture. And it's so funny because I was talking to this friend and she's from China, and back then she was like, are you dating anybody? And I was like, no. And she's like, okay, you should marry a Miao woman. I was like, I used to talk to a Korean girl, and she's like, no, you should marry a Miao woman. It's good for you. And
it's
she's
good
like,
for you.
Yeah. And I was like, what? Why did you say that? And then I was like, what about you? Are you married? And she's like, oh yeah, I'm talking to this guy, but he's not Miao. I was like, what? You told me to marry. But then she's like, well, he's a minority. He's not Han. And I was like, oh, okay. He's like, if you marry somebody who's not Han Chinese, but another minority in China, then I feel like you understand each other's struggle. And I was like, wow. And she's like, and then that's what she told me. She's like, that's what it means to be Sheng Miao or raw Miao, is that heart of not conforming to the Han Chinese.
With that whole saying, like they always say, raw Miao, whereas Jiao is the cooked Miao. Yeah. There's that separation.
I think there are some beautiful Miao women who are Hmong women who like rose the ranks in China to like stardom. I think, in 2016.
You mentioned a few.
Yeah. But then, the Gu magic thing is still back to being stereotyped, right? I think that's still very apparent too, because recently in 2016, right, Phra Tha La, right, the mayor or the stand-in mayor of Phra Tha La, I think he was appointed to be a temporary mayor, and he made this like horrible public comment in a speech where he says, I think it says here that the witchcraft culture of the Miao is horrible. And then he said, why should we promote this kind of culture in our city? And he also added that, the people should be warned against Miao women who uses sorcery to ensnare men. And this is 2016, and he was making two comments about. He was making this comment.
It happened right before we went.
Yeah, about two Miao women, and saying that Hmong women. And
this is the mayor.
The mayor
of Wenshan of Phra Tha La, which is called Wenshan.
Yeah. So he was an ethnic Han Chinese
in Yunnan province.
And in Yunnan province, and Phra Tha La has a lot of Hmong population. So I think the Hmong people there were in an uproar, and they kind of like protested or wrote against the mayor, and so they really replaced him. But it's just this stereotype.
They replaced him because of that comment.
Yes.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, that's racist.
It's pretty cutthroat.
It's called racism. Yeah. So you did mention, though, there have been quite a few beautiful Hmong women who have made it to stardom.
In Chinese history, they always talk about the four femme fatale, or the four beauties who changed the history of China.
There's this mythology of the four beauties.
Right? The four new beauties of
modern day
China too, and one of them is, Fan Bingbing. Fan Bingbing does a lot of Chinese historical drama. I don't watch Chinese historical drama, but I know Fan Bingbing is a big one, and people who watch Chinese historical should know her too, and she's really beautiful. But then another one that's featured is opera singer called Song Zuying, and Song Zuying is Miao. She grew up in Hunan. She went through the ranks of the military. She became an opera singer, and she's considered one of the most beautiful women in China. She's old now, but
quite a few of these ladies are quite like they're much older.
Yeah, they're much older now, but then I guess
they're considered the modern four beauties of China.
Yeah, and Song Jiying is Miao, and so I think that's pretty inclusive of how Chinese see Hmong people. Is that I think this is kind of like breaking the trend, I'm saying, because Hmong women are being recognized in China as being a modern beauty as well. I think I see it like that. Like there's no negative stereotype about her.
All of this is really new to me. I don't even know who any of these ladies are. I've never really been big into Chinese pop culture or Chinese like cinemas or anything like that. So all this is really fascinating to me. To not just read about these stereotypes, but then actually like be able to watch and see and kind of like make your own judgment or and
these are like perspectives from the East that the West here in the West we don't talk about, we don't hear it, we don't see it.
I mean, it's definitely not unreal with the mayor of Abattoir making that statement and people like obviously being upset about that because the stereotype of Hmong woman and therefore Hmong people practicing some type of dark witchcraft.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Chinese novels out there that, wuxia novels that just keep going and going about still perpetuating this stereotype that, the male people, culture, woman still practices.
Yeah.
Sorcery, goo magic, poison, sexualizing and stealing Han men.
Today's conversation has been really interesting. Definitely more to dig into and look into. So if any of you have like more examples of this, definitely share it with us, send it to us, comment it. If you're watching via YouTube or Facebook, we will go ahead and add some links for you to do your own further reading onto our Facebook pages and our YouTube videos and stuff like that. So if you're listening via a podcast app, definitely look for us in our social media and like and follow as well.
Yes, and we look forward for you to join us on our next episode
of Hmongish. Bye, everyone.